this conference or panel discussion on the Ukrainian-Turkish strategic partnership. What is next? And I would like in particular to thank the Consulate General of Ukraine for reaching out to us here at Kadir University and the CIES, the Center for International European Studies, to hold this joint event. Of course, when we started planning it in late September, October, we did not anticipate the November 25th developments in the Turkish Straits, but this gives also our event today a greater sense of urgency for more fruitful thought and discussion. And as I was thinking about this event before coming down here, I was thinking how the CIES has a long-standing tradition of being interested, of researching, of presenting to the public, etc., in developments in Ukraine, as well as a focus in Ukraine, the Black Sea region, and also a focus on Ukrainian-Turkish relations. In fact, in 2011, a publication titled Enhancing Security in the Black Sea Region Prospects for the Turkish-Ukrainian Relationship was published jointly by the CIES and the Razumkov Center in Kyiv. As a result of an international conference we held here in May 2011, jointly organized by the CIES, the Razumkov Center, and the Open Ukraine Foundation. And our focus on Ukraine has increased over time. In fact, in 2017 and 2018, in June of these months, the International Neighborhood Symposium, which is one of our flagship events, was held in Odessa. And we are now preparations underway for the next International Neighborhood Symposium to be held there in June next year. Apart from this symposium, the Neighborhood Symposium that we held in Odessa this June, Dr. Hannah Shelest, who is going to be one of our speakers here, was a senior visiting Tubitak fellow at the CIES in September of this year. And as a result of this collaboration, on September 21st, we held a joint conference, the CIES together with UA Ukraine Analytica, which is a journal where Hannah Shelest is the editor-in-chief, titled Hard Talk, Changes in the Black Sea Security Architecture, ? And we had a very interesting discussion in this room with Hannah Shelest, with Mita Chelikpala, and a few others, Mustafa Aydin, and so on. And this was an event co-sponsored by NATO and the Black Sea Trust. On the 4th of December, not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, the CIES, in partnership with the Friedman Foundation for Freedom, we held a panel discussion on the situation of the Tatars since 2014, where Boris Babin, the permanent representative of the President of Ukraine, Crimea, was here together with Zarima Barieva, an activist and researcher with the Crimean Tatar Resource Center, and a couple of Turkish colleagues that are here in this room. And today we have this event as well, a joint event by the CIES, the Consulate General of Ukraine in Istanbul, the Hennady Udovenko Diplomatic Academy of Ukraine, run by Sergei Korzunsky, who was Ukraine's long-standing ambassador to Ankara until he went back to Ukraine last year, and the Foreign Policy Council of Ukrainian Prism. So, and also as a result of Dr. Shelest's residence in September, we are currently working on developing a Black Sea Security Index, jointly, our institutions, Ukrainian Prism and the CIES, and it's something that's a work in progress, and hopefully sometime next year we'll start having the first results of this index out. And in a way, why this particular interest? Well, because both here at Kadir Has and the CIES, and in particular also the Kadir Has University's IR department, we are a number of colleagues with a wider interest in the region. Yes, I'm actively involved, but so is my colleague Mita Chelikpala, Mustafa Aydin, Serhat Guvench, Sinema Chikmeshe. Many of us cover different aspects of developments in the wider region. And this is reflected also in courses that we offer that are related, both in our MA and PhD programs, and also undergraduate per se, and the fact that I was thinking today how we have a growing number of our PhD candidates that are starting to do dissertations in the region. So we have an active interest in relations between, in developments in Ukraine, relations between Ukraine and Turkey and the wider Black Sea region. And hence this third conference since the start of this academic year. So therefore I look forward, at least on our end, to a continued partnership and synergy with Ukrainian colleagues and Ukrainian institutions, and to keep an interest on these issues here and to promote further research and collaboration. Now I'd like to give the floor to Yevgen Dibrov, who is a consul of Ukraine here in Istanbul. The Consul General, Alexander Gaman, unfortunately is bedridden with a kidney infection and could not be with us, but Yevgen, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Unfortunately, Mr. Gaman couldn't be with us today due to his illness. Nevertheless, we will start our panel. As you know, in November, the President of Ukraine, Mr. Poroshenko, visited Turkey. He was here in Istanbul. It was the Turkish-Ukrainian City Council meeting. Today is December, the end of the year, so we would like to sum up the latest developments in Ukrainian and Turkish relations and outline prospects for the future. I am very pleased to see you here in our event, so I wish you fruitful discussion and good morning. Thank you.
So I asked the panelists to join me in the panel. So we can begin. All right. So, as you've seen from the program, which we have sent you, and it's also the copies outside, the idea is, to talk about the strategic partnership, and we've asked the speakers to think about some of the questions that they could talk about. What are the regional challenges that have an influence on Turkish-Ukrainian relations? What multilateral formats can be beneficial to Turkey and Ukraine? Can the Ukrainian-Turkish relations be considered to be strategic partnership? And what are the priority spheres to enhance the cooperation? And in order to do this, we know the strategic partnership officially began in 2011, and since then we've had about 7 meetings, and we just heard about the last one. And it's very interesting because these are the two countries that have the largest coastline in the Black Sea region. Even though Turkey and Ukraine, even though Ukraine's coastline has been encroached de facto, not de jure, de facto by Russia, but paradoxically, the two powers that have the greater say in the region are Turkey and Russia. And that's also interesting given the fact that Russia is a permanent member of the Security Council. So how then, therefore, given developments, how the Ukraine and Turkey, therefore, try to establish a strategic partnership? And there's some notes here. And there are a number of issues that are components. Some of them, of course, the strategic partnership has an objective of a free trade area, and we're supposed to be established by the end of this year. We'll see where we stand. An objective of about 10 billion USD in bilateral trade. But of course, how do you do this also in light of some other issues that have an impact on relations? The Tatar issue, which we had an event for, as I mentioned. Right now, given the November 25th developments in the Kerch Strait, can Turkey, which seems to be wanting to do this, act as a balancer between, or as a mediator between Ukraine and Russia? There's the energy issue and the energy dynamics, and given Turkey's relationship with Russia, Turk Stream, and so on. On the other hand, we know that Ukraine has signed an agreement with Turkey to buy at least unmanned aerial vehicles. So there is also a budding defense relationship. We also have developments over the last few days, the church issue, right? The approval of the request by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, by the Patriarch, the Ecumenical Patriarchate here, to grant it autocephaly or autonomy. And of course now you have a more unified church in Kyiv, and there's going to be a big visit in early January here, where not only with the church authorities in Ukraine, but also, I suspect, a big part of its political leadership will be visiting Istanbul for a big ceremony. So how does this play on relations between Turkey and Ukraine, and also vis-à-vis Russia? The limits of NATO engagement in the region or not. We know that Ukraine has a stated interest to join NATO. And of course, we have around the 6 little states around the Black Sea region, 3 of them are NATO member states, together with Turkey, Romania, and Bulgaria, with the stated intent of Ukraine and Georgia. How does this play in also in the relationship vis-à-vis Russia? And ultimately, as one thinks about the developments in the strategic partnership, there's a lot of stuff being written and assessed about what should Ukraine's foreign policy be. Some people claim that Ukraine is trying to, yes, a state intent towards the West, yes, visa-free travel, Ukrainians now have when it comes to the EU. On the other hand, is a pro-Western policy the way forward, or is it a multilateral policy, which is something that had become popular under President Kuchma some years back, and this is also something to be considered. So there are many issues, and I think our panelists are experts and will give us some of the answers and then take your questions. Now let me quickly introduce them. Let me start off with, in the order that I program, Hannah Shelest, who is the editor-in-chief of Ukrainian-Analytica, which is the only English language academic and policy journal in Ukraine. It's a privilege for me also to be a member of its advisory board. And she's also a board member of the Foreign Policy Council of Ukrainian Prism, as well as the head of another NGO called Promotion of Intercultural Cooperation. She has served for over 10 years as a senior researcher at the National Institute for Strategic Studies under the President of Ukraine, at the Odessa branch, and has worked in the press service of the governor of the Odessa region. She has been a lecturer at Odessa National University and the regional coordinator of the European Business Association. She holds a PhD in international relations from the Institute of World Economy and International Relations of the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences. And she has been a visiting fellow in a number of capacities, junior fellow, senior fellow at the NATO Defense College in Rome, a Rotary Peace Fellow, a Black Sea Young Reformer, a John Smith Fellow, and a Marshall Memorial Fellow. And if one is involved or interested in international relations in Ukraine, the chances are, whatever is happening around the world, usually one will see Hannah somewhere around the world, first of all, but on Ukrainian television at least 2 or 3 times a week as a commentator. Next to me is Mita Chelik-Pala, my colleague at in the Department of International Relations, and also the Dean of the Faculty of Economics, Administrative and Social Sciences. Where he, at the department, he teaches, he still teaches, of course, every semester, but on areas of European security and energy and critical infrastructure protection. And his areas of expertise are the Caucasus and in particular the Black Sea region and critical infrastructure protection. He's a board member of the International Relations Council of Turkey and the managing editor of the Journal of International Relations, which is an SSCI-rated journal. And he has served as an academic advisor to NATO Center of Excellence for Defense Against Terrorism in Ankara. He was board member of Consulate, the Strategic Research and Study Center of the Turkish General Staff, as well as an academic advisor to the Center for Strategic Research Summit at the Ministry of Turkish and Foreign Affairs, and also to the Casting Strategy Institute a few years back. And he was also senior associate member of St. Anthony's College at Oxford University. Next to him is Yevgenia Gaber, who until very recently was second secretary at the Ukrainian embassy in Ankara, but since this year she has become the deputy director of the diplomatic academy, the Gennady Tudorenko Diplomatic Academy in October, right? And she's back in Kiev, between Kiev and Odessa, where she's originally from. And she was here for 4 years, I think, right, in Turkey. She has previous working experience, including teaching courses on Turkish studies and Turkish foreign policy at the Department of International Relations at Odessa National University. She holds an MA in International Relations from that university and also a PhD in political studies from the Kyiv National Taras University. And her dissertation was on the original dimension of Turkish-American relations in the post-Cold War era. So Yevgenia is actually, she's both worlds. And when we met her, she was a researcher and a scholar and has since joined the foreign ministry and is now a practitioner, and now in the Diplomatic Academy also transmitting her experiences to younger and older colleagues. And last but not least, another one of my colleagues, Serhat Gubench, who is a professor of international relations in the Department of International Relations and its current department chair. He has a BA and MA degrees from our university and a PhD in political science and international relations from the Boğaziçi University. He has been previously visiting professor at a number of universities, full-time visiting positions at Istanbul University, University of Chicago, Dutch University, and Boğaziçi University. And he's interested in Turkish foreign policy and security policy and Turkish naval policy and history. And this is particularly relevant given the maritime dimension of the Black Sea and also the dimension in terms of Turkish and Ukrainian relations. He's the author of a number of books and he's also a board member of the foundation of the Lausanne Treaty Immigrants, not linked to our topic, but very close to our relationship, our personal relationship, the Greek-Turkish relationship, and also an advisory board member of Turkish University Maritime Forum, Forum. So without further ado, maybe we'll just start off. Each panelist can talk about some of the questions I raised at the beginning for about 10 to 12 minutes or so, and then we'll give the floor to engage in discussion. So we'll start with you, Anna.
Thanks a lot, Dimitris. We were planning this event since September, but it seems it is the very good moment now to speak. And as we always like, we put the question marks in our conferences with you, because it's not our task and to say what is the truth. And it seems to me that to prove something, it is always better to raise the questions, because only through them we can really refer, do we support the same idea or not? And it seems to me that in relations between Ukraine and Turkey, the question marks are extremely important. And the first question mark that I put to myself, do we really have strategic relations, or what makes them strategic? Why I raise this question? Because in Ukrainian foreign policy for decades, to name relations with some countries strategic one, it was like a fashion. It was a period when one of our previous presidents named 38 countries as strategic partners all around the world. Some of them in which we even didn't have any relations, but he visited them and he decided that it is strategic relations, like Brazil, for example. So that really made a lot of Ukrainians, those experts and more journalists, very skeptical when we use the word strategic, talking about the relations between some countries. So for myself, why I was okay with putting here the question mark after what is next, but not near the strategic, It's probably because I define the Ukrainian-Turkish relations of the last, let's say, 10 years with the two very important words that makes them strategic for me. They are complex and they are diverse. It seems to me you can't have strategic relations with a country when you have only one sphere in top priorities. When you have only one sphere that can potentially allow one or another state to manipulate or to dominate you. However, when you have a lot of points of communication, when you have a lot of points of touch and of the possible growth in the relations, that what really can make them strategic. Because it is the complexity when you show the levels of the interest. When you go to the people-to-people contact, when you go to the economic relations, when you go to the military sphere, when you go to the political sphere, or when you go to the topics of the big politics. And here, for example, such topics as Tomos, I will name of this big politics, because when I sent it for Turkey, it was less religious issue, but rather than political issue. And this non-interference in the process, as we were naming it.
Explain Thomas.
The Patriarch of Constantinople granted autonomy to the Ukrainian Church, which just a few days ago was united and finally received this autonomous status, not being connected to the Russian Church. The issue is that Russia really waited that Turkey can intervene probably in this project, and that Turkey will disagree with, or would disagree. And, but we received completely different reaction from the government of authorities of Turkey, who couldn't support it because like different religions, but we understand perfectly what type of relations are between the patriarchy and the Turkish authorities historically. That's why for us it was really important the position that Turkey government took in this situation. These cases I named the big politics because Turkey really understood what are the top priorities, what are the national interests, and what can be important in the long-term perspective. So probably when I named complexity and diversity, I needed to name the third word. It is the long-term perspective. Because very often we name something strategic because only this year we supported one or another in some cases, or we are not planning long-term. When we think about Ukraine and Turkey, it seems to me because we have such a long history of the relations, good and bad, we had some kind of wars in the Middle Ages. However, I mean, all these are in the long-term perspective, have some sustainability. The next point that I asked myself, that what really influenced these relations? And it seems to me that even that we, every time, for the last 25 years especially, have the third person in the room, the Russian Federation, or the triangle of relations. At the same time, Ukrainian-Turkish relations were developing despite a lot of other third countries or third organizations interfering. So countries managed to find the topics and agenda for cooperation despite the Russian-Turkish relations, despite the Turkish-European problems, despite the some issues in the US-Turkish relations. So two countries found these developments in the bilateral relations despite all other third factors that definitely influence the situation, but they are not preventing from cooperating. They are not becoming the first that influence them. The next issue, what is interesting for me in these relations and correlating with the question that you were talking about, is definitely that Ukraine is not considering Turkey as a NATO member. I mean, definitely Ukraine accepts it, but Ukraine doesn't build security and military cooperation with Turkey through the focus and through the lens of Turkish NATO membership. And that is, I can't be negative. It seems to me that sometimes it gives more potential for the bilateral relations in these particular spheres or in this particular region. Because definitely Turkey supports all NATO initiatives about Ukraine, and here we don't have any questions. But at the same time, Turkey allows other cooperation, if you can name this, or their own choice of cooperation. It's not because consensus agreed about this, but because they really feel what is the potential of this cooperation. Doesn't matter in which spheres we go. However, not without the difficulties. And here I will go to the latest events. It's happened that for the last year I was the only civilian member of the working group on drafting naval strategy of Ukraine and the strategic appraisal for the naval strategy. And we finished everything in, just 2 days before the Kerch Strait started. So it was very interesting to correlate what really were envisaged and predicted and how development happens. And at the same time, to see the reaction of our partners, because we were presenting it in 2 days after the Kerch Strait. And that's really, it was a very interesting week. And here, what it has demonstrated. On one way, it demonstrated a huge interest of Turkey to the first-hand information. When we, with Evgenia, because of her initiative, organized a briefing to the diplomats in Odessa, we had huge amounts of questions from Turkish diplomats about what was happening to the naval officers. They were really curious in all details, understanding wonderful what's happened, not trusting the media, not trusting statements from the Russian Federation, but really trying to understand technically what's happened and what it has been. But at the same time, we received questions that I was a little bit surprised, and I continue to receive these questions. Some of them were like, what Turkey can do, or why Turkey can really worry about it. And in this case, what I was surprised that Turkey didn't worry, it was probably not the exact words, but that Turkey perceived this incident as a small incident. That they couldn't immediately understand the first day of the full-fledged that it is not only touching Ukraine, but that to react seriously should be in Turkish national interest as well. And why I was trying to explain, because for me that incident was just one of the pieces in the big puzzle of the developments of the last years in the Black Sea region. Connected with the militarization of the Black Sea region, connected with the militarization of Crimea, connected with the modernization of the Russian Black Sea fleet, connected with the possibilities to violate the law of the sea a lot. We already used into violations of the Helsinki Final Act, but that's something new that it brought. And here, for Turkey, it should be extremely important, because the number of its ships that were standing waiting to enter the Kerch at that very day, 50% of them were Turkish ships. So from the purely economic, first, it is Turkish interests that what's happening with their ships, why they can't fulfill and why they can't have the freedom of navigation as it should be. What does mean the violation of the neutral waters, or what it means to block the ships in the neutral waters? Because in some way, let's remember when the Russian ship was passing through Bosphorus with the rocket launchers just being on the shoulders of the sailors. And these incidents, in the logic of the politics, are connected. It's not a direct definite because it's happened 3 years almost ago. But it is the logic of the behavior when you are poking the bull, when you're really showing up in the Black Sea region. And in this case, it should be perceived by Turkey as the not just competition for the influence in the Black Sea region, but as a kind of provoking Turkey to dismiss some kind of level of leadership and responsibility that Turkey would like to have in the security sphere in the Black Sea region. So that's why I said that I was really surprised by the quite calm reaction of Turkey on the 25th of November. However, and I will finish with this, as for now, I was really surprised that Turkey tried very carefully to propose the mediation efforts. Turkey spoke a few times a little bit about the problem mediation Ukrainian-Turkish dialogue that was never very much on the table of consideration because of the Normandy format. But here, it was Russia who said no. And if, to be honest, in that case, Turkey could be quite an interesting mediator. Even that it is the open act of aggression, but okay, to perceive it as a conflict. However, immediately the reaction of the Russian enemy was, no, we don't want any mediation here. Turkey, please don't be involved in this. And it seems to me that it also demonstrated the perception that Russia more and more trying to monopolize the security sphere in the Black Sea region. And Turkey is not ready for this yet. Not ready probably to, definitely not ready to the pre-1991 situation. And situation can't be the same as pre-1991. But at the same time, also being so much busy on the south, a little bit losing on the north. And here, and it is my last session answer for the introduction, Ukrainian-Turkish cooperation in the security, in the maritime sphere, in the military sphere, can become that, let's say, second paddles that will connect to each other, and that can really become the background for the more serious counteraction to the spread of the Russian influence in the Black Sea region.
Thank you very much, Anna, for the questions and the points you raised, and it's very interesting. The importance of the question mark, and we assume there is a strategic partnership. Is there one? I think you raised some of the issues as to what are some of the difficulties in such partnership. Now I give the floor to my brother.
Thank you, Dimitri. It's also my pleasure to be here to discuss Ukraine-related issues with my colleagues, and it's my, of course, not one of the most favorite issues last couple of years is because of what's happening in the Black Sea region. It's much more complicated, and mostly we upset to hear some analysis and developments within the region. But of course, it's an issue worth to discuss. I remember it was, I think, early this decade. Most probably it was again while Virginia, I was invited to talk about Turkish-Ukrainian relations. And I remember I tried to find some analysis and articles to read and to move forward afterwards. I failed to find some analysis and articles on Turkish-Ukrainian relations early this decade, almost 5 to 6 years ago. Now we have a couple of articles and analysis, and we are now discussing whether the relationship is a strategic one or not. From having nothing between those two actors to discuss the possibility of having a strategic relationship with Ukraine and Turkey is an important development. I agree with Anna. We have with dynamic, friendly, and of course gradually developing relationship, bilateral relations in fact. But of course we have lack of strategic vision, and the governments in fact in Turkey last couple of years are very keen on labeling each and every kind of a relationship between Turkey to someone as strategy. That makes the words or the strategic, I don't know, definition or content a little bit, I don't know, banal or simplistic. But beyond this analysis, there is a venue between the parties to develop a kind of a strategic partnership between each other. And there are a couple of clues of such a kind of a potential between two parties. One is, of course, an institutional structure, this Turkish-Ukrainian high-level cooperation mechanism or council. And this mechanism is an important mechanism that brings the presidential levels or presidents together to discuss all those serious issues in a friendly manner and to, I don't know, motivate even the other institutions and bureaucrats to work on some complicated issues together and to offer some solutions to those relations. And secondly, of course, both parties have managed to sign a sort of intergovernmental action plan, an action plan from 27 up to 2019, which is a sort of a draft for the parties. How can they evolve their relationship in a kind of a strategic manner. It seems that parties are eager to think twice and try to find some ways and means to make the relationship a sort of strategic relationship between the parties. And of course, this negotiations on this free trade agreement. Turkey, or Ukraine, of course, Turkey is a sort of trading state, and trade is everything, and economy is a priority for Turkish decision makers. And if the parties manage to cooperate on this free trade agreement, then most probably we may find some other ways to move forward. And of course, I read Anna's analysis on the future of the Ukrainian foreign policy. She says ties are often superficial and formal. But on the other hand, we have a potential, and the parties are eager to move forward. And they are cooperating in a wide range of areas, from political to economic, and of course, much more important than that for Turkey, defense and military sectors as well. I will not touch upon too much on those defense and security-related issues because we have Serhat here, most probably he may clarify better than I. But more than that, we have some strong cultural ties as well. This is not only the Crimean Tatars issue. Turks and Ukrainians are very closely worked on those Tatar-related issues. This is the fact, and we are the partners. But on the other hand, this passport-free travel is important. And by the way, it's an important thing, Dimitri. Turkey has two agreements with two countries, this passport-free travel, Ukraine and Georgia. And those are the two big countries to have some issues with Russia. Then, you know, Turkey is not with a huge capacity to change what's happening in its neighborhood, but working a little bit silently to make it a little bit much more complicated and to get some results and create some perspective. Maybe this is also a part of strategic vision for the future. Of course, it's not easy to say what is next, we don't know, it's not up to us, but this is the case. And many developments. But there's something big. What is big? It's bigger than bilateral relations, our neighborhood. What's happening in our region, and actors and factors surrounding our bilateral relations are much more important to define whether we will have a sort of strategic relationship in the near and far future or not. What I mean this surrounding factors and actors, of course, multilateral relationship. Turkey's and Ukraine's, EU and, of course, NATO connection. And this is a very important factor to move forward, to make the relationship as more strategic. When Turkey and Ukraine both have a prospective and promising relationship within NATO and with NATO, and with EU and within EU, both parties getting much closer to each other, and it supports bilateral relations in a strategic manner. But when Turkey or Ukraine have some issues with the EU and NATO, then it's a sort of a big problem for both parties, and the neighborhood or environments or surroundings are not promising for both parties to make much more further cooperative and strategic relationship. And other Western initiatives and institutions are also important to make the relationship more strategic and to offer some regional solutions, and Turkey has prioritized the relationship for the sake of having regional ownership of all those developments and issues, and this regional ownership scheme or mindset forces Turkey to work with those other actors as well very closely. And of course there is Russia. Russia is the most important factor and actor, in fact, to define the nature of Turkish-Ukrainian relations. For Turkey, it's no need to say Ukraine's territorial integrity is the most important thing, and therefore the occupation of Crimea is a priority. It's unacceptable for Turkey, like the Western actors and our partners. Turkey never accepts such a kind of initiative. This is one of the most important things. And of course, the protection of basic human rights of Crimean Tatars as well as other Ukrainian citizens in the eastern part of Ukraine are important stuff. And the situation in Donbass is a priority as well for Turkey. But it seems, under current circumstances, Turkish decision makers are not eager to talk too much on this issue, because it is beyond Turkey's capacity and capability to find some immediate resolution of all those clashes. But then, behind the curtains, there might be some ways and means, and Turkey is working together with the Western institutions and actors against Russia in this issue. Economically, of course, we have 4 to 5 billion US dollars trade volume. This is not that much as Turkey has with Russia, but this is a prospective way to move forward for both parties, and maybe this free trade agreement may contribute positively to reach out this 10 billion US dollars trade volume for the future. But more important than, it helps Turkey's cultural, develop Turkey's cultural ties with Ukraine is tourism, of course. The number is around 1.5 million, I think. And I just checked it, and it says that in an article, it says that Ukrainian citizens visiting abroad, 70% of them visiting Turkey. It's a huge amount of interaction between Turkey and Ukraine, and most probably Turks are getting more familiar with those Ukrainian cities and Ukrainian issues. This is also important, and investment. One of the promising areas of cooperation to make our relationship more strategic is, of course, defense. In July 2018, we have Turkish-Ukrainian Defense Cooperation meeting. It was very important, and you see some news on the newspapers on Turkey's new steps in this defense sectors. And Ukraine is one of the most important and promising partners for Turkey, because Ukrainians have know-how, technology, and they are ready to share those technology and know-how with Turkey. But what Turkey seeks is technology transfer and working together. And Turkish investments and monies can help Ukraine to move forward in this sector. This is an area that makes our relationship more strategic in terms of other developments. And the security issue is the reverse aspect of this developments. I don't want to say too much on this Black Sea security, but you know, regional ownership and the Black Sea security was one of the main pillars of Turkey's foreign and security policy. We lost this track because of Russian attitude in Georgia and then afterwards in Crimea and Ukraine. Little states, in terms of this regional ownership schemes, not eager to get together with Russia. And then it makes everything more complicated. I don't know whether we can revive those initiatives or not. Maybe Sarah comment on this issue in a detailed manner. And of course, Turkey's time to time, how can I say, unsteady, inconsistent or changing attitude in its neighborhood, foreign and time to time security policy is an issue. How to locate Turkey in our neighborhood? What about Turkey's relationship with the West and within the NATO as well? What kind of an actor? What's your proposal to normalize relations? Whether Turkey is a NATO member or not, it's beyond that. Turkey's attitude is important, but more than that, maybe Ukraine's domestic policy, the instability in Ukraine is also an important factor that negatively affected Turkish-Ukrainian strategic relations, not only bilateral but regional schemes as well. Therefore, we have to be careful on those issues. There are some priority areas, despite the fact that Russia is encircling Turkey or surrounding Turkey with its anti-access area denial bubble. Turkey's cooperation with Russia is as a vital issue. Why? Because Turkey's priority is now not the Black Sea region or the northern or eastern borders of the country, but south. And Turkey, in a very short notice, needs Russia in order to, how can I say, realize at least some of those immediate interests in the Middle East, especially in Syria. And this Turkish-Russian-Iranian trilateral cooperation is a priority for Turkey, and it poisons time to time Turkey's relations with the Western actors as well, including the US. And then how you can locate Turkish-Ukrainian relations under those circumstances. For a while, Turkey needs Russia, at least in order to get some kind of resolution of its expectations. Energy cooperation, of course, all of us very aware of the fact that Russia is bypassing Ukraine via Nord Stream and Turkish Stream. And under those circumstances, whether Turkey has a capacity to stop it or it serves Turkey's interest, this is another big discussion, and it may affect Turkey's relationship with Ukraine in the near future. What is next is very closely related with this pipeline and energy-related issues as well. And Russia's overwhelming and superiority in this region, and of course aggressive policies, most probably gonna be the main effective factor in the Turkish-Ukrainian bilateral relations. I don't want to touch upon this church issue, and lastly on this mediation thing, it seems that at present, especially the general inclination in Ankara is to refrain from getting involved with Ukraine and Russia. Why? Of course, if Ankara sees any potential or support from both parties to play a role in the reconciliation or the resolution of those issues, Ankara may play a game, but without having any European support, it seems that it's impossible. Then I don't expect any kind of move from Turkish side to realize unexpected, at least up until the elections, or I don't know whether having some results of Turkey's activeness in the Middle East. And those are the issues that I would like to touch. I think I'm on time limit here, but I managed to raise some questions at least regarding your questions and comments. I may try to expand my discussions.
Well, thank you very much for your very comprehensive presentation. You sort of touched on all the issues except maybe, as you said, the church issue, which Hannah talked about it quite a bit. So let's also now give the floor to Ukrainian government.
Thank you, Dimitris, and thank you for hosting us here today. Actually, for me, today is a very special day because on the 18th of December, exactly 3 years ago, as you said, I first came to Ankara to serve as the Ukrainian embassy, so it's kind of an anniversary for me. But why I'm saying this, not only because of my personal connections with Turkey and the special place which Turkey holds in my heart, which is actually true, but also because of another thing I would like to draw your attention to, because the Turkey to which I came in 2014 and the Turkey of 2018 are actually two different Turkeys. When you talk about this country, you cannot talk about one single Turkey developing during all these times. I mean, after the failed attempt in July 2016, and then after the successful constitutional referendum in 2017, many different things have changed in Turkey, both in political terms, in terms of institutions, political structure, but also public life, even culture, education, economy, but also in terms of its strategic culture and foreign policy. The same goes for Ukraine. I mean, Ukraine in 2014 or earlier, Ukraine before Maidan, Ukraine before all these changes, before association agreement with the European Union, Ukraine before all these reforms, and even before Thomas, which we are talking about today as well, is a very different Ukraine. Ukraine in 2013, for example, and Ukraine in 2018, or even next year, are also two different countries, both in terms of mentality, in terms of its geopolitical choices, and in terms of its domestic political developments. And then, with this being said, when you look at the Turkish-Ukrainian relations, what we generally say when you somehow try to define or characterize them, you have these most important milestones in the development of bilateral relations, and then you say something like 1922, so this is the first starting point when you have this brotherhood and friendship agreement between Ukraine and People's Republic early in the 20th century and then Turkey. And then the next step is 1992, when you have in modern time, after the declaration of independence by Ukraine, a new agreement on friendship and cooperation between the two countries. And then the next step is 2011, when we have this institutionalization of relations, and you have this high-level strategic council, and this mechanism of meetings between presidents of Ukraine and Turkey. And this is the highest level achieved in bilateral relations. So after 2011, we call bilateral relations strategic partnership. And this is actually the case. Anna spoke a lot, and also Nitat mentioned that for both countries in 2011 probably that was mostly about the name. So this is kind of declaration of intentions to make these relations strategic. And afterwards it starts gaining more and more importance, and it becomes actually filled with real intent. And after that you don't have any new stages and any new milestones in relations. I mean, this is kind of strategic partnership, and it evolves somehow, it develops somehow, and that's it. But if you have these different elements of the equation, which have changed so much, can you say that the sum, the result of the equation itself is the same? So if Turkey has changed a lot, if Ukraine has naturally changed a lot, can we still talk about the strategic partnership? Has it changed, or what can be next in these relations? And here I don't speak actually about the necessity to somehow rename these relations or to rebrand them, because this rebranding actually doesn't help when you have really problems to resolve. But mostly about the necessity to somehow readjust these relations to the new realities of the modern period of the post-truth, post-Trump, post-Brexit, post-blah blah blah era. Because everything has changed, and you cannot still talk about the same strategic relations which are based on, political dialogue, very intensive and dynamic meetings between different ministers, and then you have these free trade agreement negotiations, which is kind of a never-ending story, because we discuss, which is good, and hopefully at some point we will complete the process. But still, those are the pillar stones. Those have been the pillar stones of the relations so far. And in the world after 2014, after Crimea, we live in different realities. So probably there should be some tweaks to this strategic partnership. And first of all, for each country, for Ukraine and for Turkey, to realize where we stand and what we want to achieve. And probably these goals would be very different from the goals which we put in this name or brand of strategic partnership when the first that agreement was signed in 2011. And actually not only countries but also geopolitics are very different. The situation is very different in the Black Sea region, but also in the wider Black Sea region, in the Sea of Azov, in the Baltics, in Caspian, everywhere, even in the Middle East, you see completely different regional dynamics. And therefore, they also have this influence on bilateral relations between Ukraine and Turkey. So you have Russian aggression first in 2008 in Georgia, and then in 2014, the occupation, illegal, unrecognized annexation of Crimea in 2014. And afterwards, it's not something that actually stopped there, because together with aggression in the eastern regions of Ukraine, you see these new aggressive moves of Russia in the Sea of Azov. And I would say that it's not going to end there, because this is just the first step. And the first step was the occupation of Crimea by Russia, okay? And then that was a new aggressive move in the territorial waters of Crimea. And Russia claims those waters also to be Russian territorial waters, though this is a completely nonsense, because sometimes when I read these comments of Turkish experts who argue, those ships, I mean, in the Kerch Strait, in that incident on November 25, they were in the territorial waters, or they were not in the territorial waters. I mean, it's not important at all, because anyhow there is freedom of navigation in the Sea of Azov. But if you speak about the territorial waters of Russia, so you do not recognize the official position of Turkish Republic on that issue, because Crimea is still Ukraine, and there is no something like Russian territorial waters at all in the Sea of Azov, or in the Black Sea, or in the Kerch Strait. But I think that after the Kerch Strait we will see new aggressive moves and new provocations of Russia also in the Black Sea. And this is actually why Turkey has to be very much concerned about it, because as Hanna said, this is not something like a one-time thing that it happens and then you all talk about it and then, okay, so it's not going to be a full-scale war anymore anyhow, because Russia and Ukraine are not going to go into this open war. It's not about open war, but it's about turning the Black Sea into the Russian lake. And here it's a big question whether Turkey has or does not have enough of capacity, enough of political will, and enough of real resources to say stop at some point. And if you have some incident in the Bosphorus Strait, I know that Serhat even wrote and kept for the Independent and many different Western newspapers back in 2015. If you have new crisis with the Russian Federation, what actually you can do, being dependent in different areas and different terms, starting from energy supplies up to these strategic weapon supplies and so on and so forth. So will there be the time then in a couple of years or in a couple of months to come up with some real actions? Or is it better to think in advance and actually to take a Ukrainian lesson, probably as a lesson for Turkey, what can happen to a regional country and to a neighbor of Russia? If it is weak and if it does not have enough resources to start at the very beginning, because afterwards it might be too late. And it's interesting also, I just came from Tallinn, and there we had meetings with the Estonian School of Diplomacy, and we had this round table on the security issues and all this maritime security. And we had an expert from Lithuania, and he said that no one actually reminded this today, but we had the same problem with Russia a couple of years ago in the Baltic Sea, because we have there are these kind of cables and strategic infrastructure, underwater infrastructure, and then Russians sent their Russian ships to kind of protect strategic infrastructure under the water in the Baltic Sea, and they also prevented us from free navigation in the Baltic Sea, and we had huge problems. And now this Nord Stream 2 and all other projects and more Russian presence in different aspects, in different dimensions in the region, we're afraid that at some point it can again send its ships here, and in Estonia, in Lithuania, in Latvia, we're not sure that NATO will make the first shoot, say, to stop those ships, because when you are somewhere in Brussels, even Latvia and Lithuania think somehow distant, not to speak about Turkey and Ukraine and all this region. So this is general issues. I mean, all these regional things are really changing. And then again, regional organizations. Ukraine and Turkey have been actively involved in different multilateral platforms of cooperation in the Black Sea. And I would say that for Turkey, such platforms like BISEC, for example, like Black Sea 4, like Operation Black Sea Harmony, they used to be very important ones, because first that was kind of Turkish presence in the Black Sea, and those initiatives were unparalleled initiatives, which is good for Turkey, right? And second, it's multilateral. So this is something that Turkey prefers to do. These platforms do not involve NATO vessels, and there is no problem with Montreal Convention, and then you do not have American ships here. So this is something Turkey used to be very comfortable with. And those platforms in the Black Sea Basin were the main platforms of projecting Turkish influence into the Black Sea. And if you look at the situation now, what you have in the region, first, there is no Ukrainian representatives in the Operation Black Sea Harmony, because there is no possibility anyhow to exchange data, to exchange intelligence with Russian officers who are also present there, and there is Russian liaison officer in this regional organization. And then BISEC is kind of acting, but I would not say it's very efficient. And then you have all those countries which have problems between each other, like Armenia, Azerbaijan, and then like Georgia and Russia, and Ukraine and Russia, and so on and so forth. So actually it exists, but there is no something very concrete and very solid about its activities. And now we have a question question about the Black Sea Forum. I mean, after the incident in November 25 in the Kerch Strait, Ukrainian Navy, and we also had the discussion in Odessa, this roundtable with the Ukrainian Navy headquarters representatives, who told us that we do not see any more necessity to take part in it, because Black Sea Forum is not efficient, so we cannot do anything with Russians, and probably we should think about some kind of new cooperation, probably in bilateral format, probably those might be some kind of drills or joint exercises, naval exercises together with Romania, especially together with Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey, and so on and so forth. But definitely the format of this regional cooperation would also change a lot. And again, there is a question, because we Ukrainians like asking these questions about what is strategic partnership nowadays, because the strategic partnership in its traditional senses, we used to talk on it and to write all those books and the academic articles about what strategic partnership is all about. It's not something unchangeable with the lapse of time. And the more you have these violations of different norms of international law and international organizations and so on, and security guarantees, assurances like Budapest Memorandum, the more you question the viability of this term itself. Because now you have this strategic partnership with kind of reservation clauses, or with some kind of limitations, or strategic partnership on an ad hoc basis, so you cooperate on the issues you want to cooperate on, and then you just kind of agree to disagree on the other issues, and then there is a beautiful Turkish word that I never could pronounce, like "konlaştırması" or something like putting compartment and putting different problems into different tracks and into different issues. At some point it's good because it does not prevent you from actually developing your relations, but on the other hand, can you actually trust the strategic partner if at some point you would just get answer no, because this is something that is not in my interest, this is not beneficial for me, so you stay there and you try to talk to Russia by yourself, because we don't care what happens. And then again, to develop these strategic partnerships as you want, the main condition is to be independent and autonomous in your strategic choices. And there is a question on whether both countries, Ukraine and Turkey, can be absolutely independent in their strategic choices. I mean, on some issues, of course, we get the support from Turkish Republic as Ukraine, and we're very grateful to it, and we stated it on different occasions. We get the support on Crimean issues, on the issues of Crimean Tatars and human rights violations in Crimea, territorial integrity, which is very important for Ukraine as well. But then, again, we have the Turkstream project where Turkey is involved in. It's one of the main co-sponsors. And the question is not even about the first line which comes to Turkey, but about the second line which will bring Russian gas further to Europe. And when you hear about these projects to diversify energy supplies to Turkey, and Turkey being dependent like 55% in its imports of gas in Russia, now will bring even more gas from Russia through Turkstream, which is an obviously political project bypassing Ukraine. And then you have Akku nuclear power plant, and then you have S-400 deal with Russia. And we have many of those issues which to some extent are in Turkey's interests if you look at the first side, but then in long-term perspective this only brings more dependence of Turkey on the Russian Federation. And in case something happens, in case there is another crisis, what Turkey can do and what Ukrainian-Turkish relations will look like. And here again, going back, I'm finishing 1 or 2 minutes, just the last 2 points, to Crimean issue. We always say that Crimean Tatars and Crimean Tatars human rights, but also Crimean issue per se is very important, and this is a red line for Ukraine and for Turkey. So this is a non-negotiable issue, and Turkey will never do anything, so even in its dialogue with Turkey will never recognize its annexation, and we are sure it will not. And this is something that Russia and Turkey try not to discuss, or just to make this kind of very slight mediation, so given like lists of Ukrainian political prisoners in Russia to President Putin, so that probably he would somehow react to it. But recently, I mean 2 or 3 days ago, there was this meeting of Tatars, some kind of Tatar dialects in Ankara, and then there were comments of Mr. Muratov, who is a representative of Russian President Putin for Crimea-related issues, and he warned Turkey, I mean he used this word, he warned Turkey that if Turkey recognizes Meclis, Crimean Tatar Meclis, it will threaten both Turkish-Russian relations and Turkey itself, because this is a banned radical extremist, I don't know what you name it, organization in the Russian Federation, so there is no way Turkey can support it and then develop its relations with Russia. So as practice shows, you cannot always put all this in different tracks, into parallel tracks. It will go to some point, but at that very point you will have to make this strategic choice. And this is a big question, which choice you will do and how much place for political maneuvering you will have at that point. And just to finish my remarks, these years where Ukraine and Turkey could cooperate together, I would name 5 of them very shortly without going into details, and we can talk about it later if there will be any questions. First, I would say, of course, hard security issues and maritime security, first of all. Given the restrictions of Montreal Convention, it's difficult to think of some kind of wide-scale formats at the moment, and of NATO rising presence in the Black Sea. Probably Turkey will object to it and oppose it. But today, for example, we have the first British vessel, the first British warship coming to the Black Sea, just in a sign of support to Ukraine, to monitor the security situation in the Black Sea. That might be a good choice for Turkey as well. There are some rumors recently about the decision to open again the naval base on the Black Sea coast of Turkey. I mean, I remember them 20 years ago, I remember them 15 years ago. I'm not sure this is the case now. Okay, some newspapers, media outlets write about this. Being so deeply involved in this southern dimension issues in Syria and so on, I'm not sure Turkey can and will want to do it. But yet again, not to be afraid to call a spade and to call Russian aggression, and not some kind of fire being opened against Ukrainian vessels, like this fire came from nowhere and no one knows the origin of this fire. So being very specific and developing cooperation in the maritime security sphere, number one. And then, again, common energy projects and infrastructural projects together with Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey, maybe Ukraine, like TANAP project and all the related infrastructure projects would be a nice choice, both bringing stability to the region in general and lessening dependence on these countries in Russian Federation. Then economic cooperation, not limited to free trade agreement, of course, defense cooperation and creating defense industrial complex for joint production of new products with Ukrainian experience, with Turkish investments and Turkish industrial base, even for the third markets, presenting those products on the third markets and being more autonomous and more independent in its own military and defense complexes. And number 5, the very last point, I would also say developing relations between academia, between experts, between universities, because we're living in the, under the conditions of the hybrid war. So how you present information, from which sources you take information, how credible they are, whether these sources are in Russian language and they are retranslated from Russian Federation, or these are original sources, even in Ukrainian, or written by Turkish experts who at least can read and write in Ukrainian. This is very important. So education, media and expert circles cooperation, number 5. And I think I will end here, and then we can discuss the questions about your session.
Thank you very much, Evgeny, for your presentation. Basically, what you're stressing is fundamental rethinking of the strategic partnership. And I think it's very interesting how you said that when it was launched in 2011, how both countries fundamentally changed, and therefore one has to reassess it to see is a heat into it. Last but not least, Serhat Kodachi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, my friend Dimitri. Well, I'm less sure about what I'm going to talk about now after having heard our commentators from Ukraine who came here with first-hand information which we didn't. But nevertheless, I would like to start on a conceptual note. My PhD thesis was on US-Turkey strategic partnership. And I finished it in year 2003. Back then, I was unable to find a substantive definition of the concept. It defied, empirical definition. But mostly it was a diplomatic courtesy to label your partner as a strategic partner in the immediate aftermath of the Cold War. Turkey was a strategic partner of the United States, not because US wanted Turkey to be a strategic partner, but Ankara came up with the idea to make up for lack of EU candidacy. It was a consolation prize for Turkey. Whereas I remember when Clinton visited Romania, he also defined US-Romanian relations as strategic partnership because Romania back then was not a NATO member yet. So just to make your partner feel more secure about its place, its status within the hierarchy. The closest definition I could come to when I was writing my thesis was that, strategic partnership means that you don't have full agreement on each and every significant issue. Okay? So what matters on issues that matters to you, you may not be on the same page. You may have differences, but there might be promising areas of cooperation. And the idea is to focus on ideas of cooperation to strengthen the ties, despite the existence of disputes, disagreements, and lack of understanding on several issues. And we have come a long way. The strategic partnership I see as responsible for today's transactionalism, which has been poisoning bilateral relations, multilateral structures around the globe. US-Turkish relations, transaction. Turkey-German relations, transaction. And of course, an offshoot of this development is compartmentalization, pretending that you can go on with business as usual despite serious problems in the making. I've been a student of international relations since 1984, so I am a Cold War scholar, at least. And since 1984, Turkey has been at crossroads of one sort or another every 2 or 3 years. But literally, Turkey is at a serious crossroads now. Just to remind you, a few developments that took place after the incident at the Strait of Kerch. US declared, or Pentagon, let CNN know that they will be sending a warship into the Black Sea. Normally, they don't need to do that because they regularly send warships into the Black Sea to show of force for freedom of navigation missions or as part of NATO's ballistic missile defense system. So this time, it was publicized. Second, Royal Navy sent in a naval ship, but it was not a warship. Yeah. It's an oceanographic survey ship, sent for a freedom of seas mission. In other words, to make a political and legal statement rather than to conduct gunboat diplomacy or, well, it's a naval diplomacy of one sort, but it's not meant to convey a very strong message to the Russians. Last week, President Erdogan declared Turkey's intention to launch a military operation across the Euphrates to the areas controlled by the Syrian Democratic Forces. You may also read them as PYD, YPG. Well, we don't know to what extent this prospective Turkish operation will enjoy US support. We've been receiving mixed signals. But for sure, if Turkey decides to go without regard to US objections, especially Pentagon's objections, at one point Turkish and US militaries will clash. And this will mean throwing Turkey into the arms of Russia. Simple as that. And then the situation in the Black Sea will be totally different. Whereas, if Russia continues to act like this, Turkey will have to decide. I mean, it's a point of decision for Turkey. I remember a year ago when I attended a conference, some naval officers who, made presentations in the meeting expressed their anticipation, hope that it may be possible to revive all these regional initiatives Turkey championed in the Black Sea. Black Sea for Black Sea harmony and to some extent BSEC. I think with the recent incident, Putin or Russia spelled the death of the regional security architecture Turkey tried to build really hard. So that security architecture is no longer in place. I mean, we cannot assume that it may ever be revived to serve the security interests of the parties. So it's a new situation. Also, in the same speech when President Erdogan announced Turkey's intention to launch a new operation into northern Syria, he also mentioned that Turkey will be ordering 120 F-35 Joint Strike Fighters from the United States. Well, the original order, Turkey was originally slated to receive 100 F-35As, land-based versions. The additional 20, our president spelled out, would be in the naval version, the STOL or VTOL version, vertical takeoff and landing version, to operate from Turkey's newly building amphibious ships or assault ships, or even some consider them aircraft carriers. Well, this announcement does not conform the repeated Turkish determination to buy 2 battalions of S-400s. How do you circle a square? These are all major choices in and of themselves. Every single of them is an important choice. And Turkey has to decide. I mean, there is no midway. There is no room for transactionalism. There is no room for compartmentalization. I mean, Turkey, yet again, has to decide which side it will be on. I read the announcement in Turkish papers as well that Turkish Navy will be building its 9th naval base in Sürmene, Trabzon. What kind of a sign is that? I don't know. But also Turkish Navy, again, according to media reports, is conducting a naval exercise in the Eastern Mediterranean with its allies, including the United States. Well, yes, you're right. Turkey's attention is more focused on the south than the north, but I don't think it's possible to decouple, the two theaters from each other. Very, very difficult. In September, Russian Navy conducted a large-scale exercise in the Eastern Mediterranean, where about 25 pieces of warship, submarines, aircraft, including heavy bombers, which were detached from mainland Russia. And as it happens, in some social media accounts, which are clearly pro-Russian, the areas issued as danger zones by Russia were put on the map, and one of those areas happened to be between Turkey and Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. In effect, that meant, the area was denied to Turkey during the period of exercise. So you referred to Russia as lying, if I got you wrong, if I got you right, but I guess the bear is back. And it's playing the hard ball. And also we have to admit that Russia is the top dog in the naval hierarchy of Black Sea, and it will remain so for the foreseeable future. Turkey doesn't have resources to match the growing Russian capabilities. Also, I think it was in late November they announced the deployment of the 3rd S-400 battalion in Crimea. Therefore, they consolidated their A2AD bastion in that part of the Black Sea, I would say. The issue for Turkey is how to deal with a Russia, you know, who is no longer a status quo power in the Black Sea. You know, the regional security architecture, Turkey set up, worked in favor of Russia as long as Russia was weak. So, as long as Russia was content with the status quo. But Russia is no longer a status quo power. For Turkey, at least in the North, Turkey is a status quo power. And without NATO, there is no way to check Russian power in the Black Sea. Are we back to square one, to the days of the Cold War? Just to remind you a historical fact, Turkish Navy was not able to send in warships into the Black Sea until Turkey was admitted to NATO in 1952. Last time Turkey sent submarines into the Black Sea was in 1943 under the command of late Fahri Korucu. After that, you know, Turkish Navy had no presence whatsoever in the Black Sea. So, history tells us something. As for the Ukrainian-Turkish strategic partnership, well, I guess in the recent visit of the Ukrainian president to Turkey, the adjective strategic was less pronounced. Because I remember his visit in 1916 coincided with the port call by a frigate of Ukrainian Navy and an auxiliary of the Ukrainian Navy. I didn't see any Ukrainian ships this time. Was it a deliberate choice or not? I don't know. Or what, was it because the Ukrainian Navy was not able to send the warships for operational reasons? I don't know. But obviously the naval element was missing this time. Turkey sees an existential threat in the south. That is the possibility of the so-called Kurdish corridor stretching from Iraq all the way to the Mediterranean. And therefore Turkey's attention and resources have been funneled to the theater in the south. And the situation in the south is more complicated with the recent discovery of natural gas resources. Turkish Navy, I know, I mean, there are former career officers here, needs every single operable vessel in the Eastern Mediterranean to challenge the exclusive economic zone claims of some of its neighbors. So it's a resource issue. But its resource issue is not peculiar to Turkey because force generation is a problem for NATO. There are not enough ships to go around. Even the United States cannot deploy to so many theaters simultaneously. Though NATO maritime commander Admiral Fogel, proudly announced, I think it was 2 months ago, that NATO's presence in the Black Sea increased from 80 days a year to 120 days a year. What does that mean? I don't know. But my feeling or my conclusion is that Turkey will be increasingly relying on NATO to check Russia in the Black Sea. Therefore, we will see a more willing and more cooperative Turkey for an increased, enhanced and longer NATO naval presence in the Black Sea, while it's busy in the south with Syria and the Eastern Mediterranean exclusive economic zone issues. A final word on Turkey, Ukraine, what they can achieve together. I remember, again, a personal anecdote. 20 years ago, in one of the first conferences I attended, a think tank in Kyiv was one of the organizers. And at the time, the Turkish naval officers who attended the conference were very optimistic about cooperation with Ukraine. But we didn't know Ukraine at that time. We didn't know what we could do. Ukraine, as a scholar, remains terra incognita, even to this day. Because what kind of concrete areas of cooperation are available, I mean, we don't know. You mentioned about how surprised those Turkish naval officers about the incident. Well, Turkish Navy assumed a blue assumed a number of blue water missions for itself, including keeping the sea lines of communication open, you know, for an uninterrupted flow of trade in and out of Turkey. Well, if keeping regional sea line of communication to Ukraine proves to be a very serious problem, that means, I mean, Turkey and Turkish Navy have a serious challenge to tackle, and it cannot stand to this challenge on its own, unfortunately. So this incident also reminds Turkey of its size, of its capabilities, and of what it can achieve on its own or as a lone wolf. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I mean, even though the other speakers also raised the wider dimension of the Turkish-Ukrainian relationship, you approach it from a different, you approach it from the challenges Turkey faces, and therefore one of the products of Turkish challenges is also dealing with the Turkish-Ukrainian relationship, which is a slightly different perspective, but I think it's also very telling of some of the challenges that Turkey faces and Ukraine faces. I think we've had really excellent presentations, so many issues that were presented. You know, the more you take part in conferences and meetings, the less note you tend to take, and I've taken a lot of notes because I think it was a very enriching session in terms of what we heard and some of the challenges out there. And I hope you are also inspired to continue this discussion with us and ask the questions. We have some time, so please, the floor is yours. And also, you might also want to ask each other some questions. So, who wants to go first? Don't be shy. Yes, sir. That's it. I'll give you a microphone for everyone to hear, and introduce yourself, and ask your question.
First of all, thank you for your valuable insights. Çağrı Çevik, I'm a PhD candidate here at Kadir Has, and I would like to ask you about the sort of other strength of Russia, which is holding the faucet basically for the energy, the natural gas. I mean, who can realistically challenge Russia when they control the most viable energy source within the region? I mean, Turkey and Ukraine both depend on Russian natural gas to heat their homes. So, I mean, besides the security concerns and the military bullying, there is actually the effect of economic pressure that Russia can put on the regional countries. Thank you very much.
Who do you ask the questions to?
General.
Okay, let's take another one, and then number two, and then we'll get back to the final.
I'm a retired civil servant. Now I have questions to both sides. There are three NATO countries in the Black Sea now. When you talk about NATO presence, you mean additional NATO presence. Secondly, the European attitude of the European Union. As I remember, maybe I'm mistaken, they talk about Eastern Ukraine, but there isn't much talk about Crimea. And has the implementation of visa exemption for Ukrainian citizens started or not? They promised that. And a blunt question: what is the attitude of Ukraine vis-à-vis the Montreux Convention? Should it be changed or should it be maintained, preserved? Thank you.
Okay, we actually have quite a few questions here, so let's go responses and then we'll get back to who wants to start? Who wants to start, please?
I'll try to be brief. Let me start about the simplest question about the European Union. They speak about Crimea in the separate set of sanctions, because their sanctions against the Russian Federation are divided into three baskets. It is the three different resolutions initially. And the very first one was about, it is dated April 2014 when they were initiated, exactly because of the annexation of Crimea. And if other sanctions are prolonged every half a year, so because of Crimea, they are prolonged them every year, so they are more sustainable and long term. And they widened the list every time, for example, elections happened there that were not recognized by the European Union. They added people who were in charge of these elections to the list. European companies come, like Siemens scandal was a big scandal when Siemens wanted to sell their tubes. So we can't say that European Union is not speaking. It's just because Eastern Ukraine is more violent and hot, if you can name it like this. That's why we hear more about this in the media. About NATO, yes, even that we have 3 NATO member states, however, we are talking about other NATO countries coming here, or about the NATO strategy as an organization. First of all, the dates that Serhat was talking about, it is about exactly other countries like the US or United Kingdom, their ships coming to the Black Sea, because they can't stay longer than 21 days. So in totally they are calculating how many days, and this year we had increase. But at the same time, Ukraine is expecting the Black Sea strategy of NATO, because NATO doesn't have any strategy toward the, obviously it's never had it. And since 2014 we are talking about this. At every NATO summit in summer, they are raising this question from smaller to a little bit bigger in this year Brussels declaration. It is already some assessments, but we still don't have any kind of a document, let's say, or vision. What should be the organization? In general, they have definitely, like, there is members, there is prospective maybe members, there is Russia, but any vision of the region and the role and development over there. And the last but not least, about the Montreal Convention, we don't have fully official position about this. However, more and more we hear both from the diplomats and experts that we understand why this issue is so sensitive for Turkey, but we would like at least to start discussions, maybe not negotiations, let's start from the discussions level. Can we adjust it to the time? It's almost 100 years old. Yes, yet a little bit, and it will be 100 years old. Even technically, the naval ships started to be different. Yeah, so, at least from here, we need to start talking that maybe we need to modernize it a little bit, not violating the rights of Turkey that exist within the Montreal Convention, but let's talk a little bit more logically, because it was before new types of the ships, it was before submarines of that kind we have, it was before NATO as an organization, and before many other things. That's why definitely we push it, at least through our work with the governmental structures, that we need to emphasize sensitivity, but it's already time to start discussions, can we update it?
First, just on that question, I will ask the Montreal Convention not to repeat Thomas' words, but I would put another question maybe to Serhat about what is going to be with Montreal Convention when the Istanbul Channel is built, if it happens, when it happens, because I'm not very much into those issues. Maybe you can comment on that from the bigger point of view. And coming to your questions, well, about NATO presence in the Black Sea, that is very interesting, because once I was talking to, when I was back in Ankara in the embassy, I was talking to one of my colleagues in the Turkish MFA, and they would sometimes, after some new statements, come and ask me. So I have a question: what is Ukraine's position on NATO's growing presence in the Black Sea basin? And then, how do you think whether we should be concerned about it or not? Because you know Turkey is concerned. And my question in response was, you are asking as a NATO member, as a Turkey, question to me as Ukrainian, whether we should be or not be afraid of NATO's growing presence in the Black Sea Basin. I mean, it's interesting because you're talking about your own presence somehow, because Turkey is a NATO member. So in that respect, of course, it sounds a little bit ridiculous, but what Hanna said, when we say NATO, we mean probably not literal Black Sea states, but other non-literal, non-Black Sea states who are NATO members and their presence in the Black Sea. And then going to the question about fossils and about energy threshold, you're absolutely correct, because energy was never energy for Russia per se. That was kind of a political tool, a geopolitical tool, to put pressure on the other countries. And Ukraine is a country which has experienced it better than any other in the region. And you're absolutely correct saying that, well, there is no luxury of saying no to Russian gas now, maybe for Turkey. But there is a possibility to think for the future what Turkey can do not to become even more dependent on Russian fossils. Because what we see now is, as I have said in my short presentation, being dependent on Russian gas, there are new initiatives, new efforts, new pipelines bringing even more Russian gas. On the one hand, the idea of such projects is very clear, like Nord Stream 2 and Turk Stream for Russia, is to split the European Union, to split NATO, to bring more problems even in Ukrainian-Turkish relations, because if you, I don't want to go into technical detail, but still if you look at the volumes which will be probably brought through these supplies through these new pipelines, it will be something like 31.5, 32 through Turk Stream, and then you have something like 55 through Nord Stream 2, which makes 87, 88, and now the general volume of Russian gas coming, like transit through Ukraine, is 90 BCM. So the idea is very clear, it's very political. I mean, to take all gas coming through the territory of Ukraine and to bring it through different pipelines. What can be done here? Diversification. I mean, TANAP pipeline is a perfect example of what we're talking about, because it's Azerbaijani gas, probably in the future it might be some Turkmenistan gas from Caspian Sea through also bringing together Georgia, Azerbaijan, Turkey, and also supported by the United States and also supported by Ukraine. And Ukraine has already claimed its intention and desire to somehow take part in it. Of course, LNG. Like now Turkey has these supplies from Algeria, I think, right, from Nigeria and a couple of other countries. That might be the idea. And then again, even talking about Turkish-Ukrainian relations, in Ukraine we have these big underground gas storages in the western part of Ukraine, something like 30-32 BCM. So we came up with the suggestion that we could rent it actually to Turkey and give something like 15-16 BCM of those gas storages for Turkey, so that even when it takes Russian gas or Azerbaijan or some other gas, you cannot put them like by molecules, which is what? You can use them as additional or extra gas volumes in case you get these cuts off from Russian Federation. So anytime Moscow would say, I don't want you to make this or that step, otherwise I will just tap off your gas, you can use those gas storages, so on and so forth. So there are many different options, but just to conclude with it, why Turk Stream is not good not only for Ukraine, but I would claim it's also not good to Turkey, because there is no other country in between. And in case something happens, this is only between Russia and Turkey. And in case Moscow decides to reduce gas supplies, it just does it. In mid-2000s, like 2005, 2006, there were some problems with gas supplies to Istanbul through this western pipeline coming through Ukraine. And then we had negotiations between our Minister of Energy and Turkish Minister of Energy, and he said that we could not get extra gas volumes from Russia, so would you help? And Ukraine, because it was Ukraine and gas pipeline system, just pumped in extra additional volumes of gas, somehow to help Istanbul and the Marmara area not to get freezed in the winter of 2005-06. Now it's only up to Moscow to decide whether it wants to give some gas to Turkey or not. So of course this is a huge problem, but it can be solved and it should be solved.
Just Evgenia, that issue. This is, of course, Turkey and Ukraine are depending on Russia on this energy issues, especially natural gas, but this is just one side of the coin. Especially Turkey has some lessons learned after this plane incident. Now, I can easily see, and you are very aware of the fact that Turkey is changing its energy policy as well. Now, within 2 or 3 years' time, Turkey's contracts with all those suppliers will end. And this is a term or chance for Turkey to renew or to sign different contracts with different suppliers. And the prices are low, and there are many suppliers now in around Turkey. And Turkey's relations with the other nations and the producers are also very effective. Then there is a chance for Turkey as well. With this Turk Stream, I agree, it's a threat to Turkey's energy security if you follow the direct line or the same line that Turkey was following the last couple of years. But, you know, it makes Russia depend on Turkey as well. For the moment, it's end up on Turkey's borders. And then EU or some EU countries will decide whether they would like to have this Russian gas or not. And Russia is taking some risks. Of course, they are bypassing Ukraine for the moment, but the end result is not dependent on Russia only. The other actors, external factors, are very important. And Russia became a sort of dependent on those countries, including Turkey as well. This is another story from this perspective that we have to think twice. And for Ukraine, there are some other, of course, potential projects. And Turkey and Yevgenia mentioned during her presentation, there are options for Ukraine as well to cooperate with Turkey or Georgia, via Georgia, Azerbaijan, and some other actors, LNG, and mostly they may easily get some support from European countries as well under those Russian sanctions to support Ukraine's energy to solve the dependency issue as well. Therefore, I may say that those dire straits or some big issues makes countries or states more imaginative and creative. There are some couple of ways. The world has changed a lot, and it's not the world of 2008, 2007. Then that makes Russia a little bit more problematic or cornered under those circumstances. Therefore, I don't see that much big threat against Turkey or Ukraine in terms of energy. Of course, it takes time, but now it's easy to transform your energy mix and structure under those current structure and current technology. For NATO presence and the EU's attitude, maybe Sarah is the true address to respond to those questions. Maybe.
He keeps passing the buck to you. So.
Exactly. a short remark, because I forgot to say that after the Russian-Ukrainian war, actually Russian aggression in Ukraine, were not buying gas from Russia. That is also important. We're buying from Slovakia, so it might be Russian gas in origin, but all agreements and everything in the reverse. So we negotiate with the European Union, not with Russia. That is another story.
Chari is right into the situation of the peace pipeline. Yeah.
Good luck with that.
Well, whether you want to or not, you have to speak.
Just a short response to Yevgenia's question. No, I don't expect any change in the conditions that govern the presence of non-littoral warships in the Black Sea as a result of this prospective Canal Istanbul, because they still would have to go through the Dardanelles, exactly, and the Marmara Sea, and therefore, I mean, by bypassing the Istanbul Strait or the Bosphorus, I mean, the Montreal regime will not be will not be bypassed. So it will remain in effect and in full force, governing the transit of non-littorals and littorals warships through the Turkish straits, or into the Black Sea, in and out of the Black Sea.
Okay. Another round. Sir? Second, trying to get a microphone. Here. Yeah.
Hello.
Introduce yourself.
Eray Alım from Yıldız let's call it in English, Yıldız Technical University. I'm writing my PhD thesis on the Ukraine crisis. So I'm trying to follow the situation very closely. Just a couple of quick questions. The first one is about the martial law. When Poroshenko declared it, there was this kind of opinion, circulating around that he did it for political reasons, as he seemed to be kind of losing the kind of momentum in terms of winning the elections in 2019 to boost his popularity. Do you agree with that? And if Tymoshenko is elected president next year, in 2019, do you think that she can strike a deal with Russia, as she is known as a very pragmatic populist leader? What is the prospect of a lasting, solution for the Ukraine crisis? Do you think she can implement the kind of Minsk agreements, like recognizing the autonomous status of the republics in the eastern part of the country? And one last question to Sarah Güvenç. There was this talk about the new Cold War when Russia kind of annexed Crimea and the military flare-up occurred in the eastern part of this region. Then the Baltic states became fearful of the Russian new aggression and so on. Do you think it died down, or it can again kind of heat up? Because the United States deployed this Aegis, I may mispronounce it, air defense systems, and they're deploying new ones in Poland. So this kind of security competition is heating up. Do you think it can kind of, it can even reach higher levels in the coming years? That's it. So,
okay. So someone in the back also. Who was it?
I'm lawyer Serkan Kara. I work with Ukrainian Istanbul Consulate in some legal issues, and I wonder about the future of Turkish-Ukrainian relation. So we attended late, we are sorry for that. It looks like we missed some points. Briefly, I
missed the most important parts. Just kidding.
So we would like to know briefly what to expect for the future of Ukrainian-Turkish relationship, and what would happen if Turkey gets on the side with Russia. Can we expect some sanctions from Ukraine in the future? What might happen if Turkey argues with Russia or against Russia? Thank you.
Okay, if we take one more, so yes, here.
Thank you very much for this great opportunity. My question is about...
Please introduce yourself.
Mehmet Alkan from Kadir University, PhD candidate. My question about the past, where from came here. As you know, NATO Bucharest Summit in the beginning of April 2008. In this summit, NATO declared that NATO welcomes Ukraine's and Georgia's Euro-Atlantic aspirations for membership in NATO. So, as you know, realist Mearsheimer claims the false promise of liberal institutions. So, what do you think about this NATO's declaration, and how could NATO manage this process more successfully?
So,
I will start this time from the beginning. I'm sure you are writing about Ukraine. Because in your questions I just was marking. First of all, there is no Ukrainian crisis. When you speak about Ukrainian crisis, you can speak only for the events from November 2013 till February 2014. That is Ukrainian crisis. Everything that started after, it is not Ukrainian crisis at all. So as soon as you define it like this, you delete and cancel the Russian role, the fact of annexation, the fact of military involvement in Donbass, the Russian US and Russian EU conflict in this sphere. So that's why I will really call you and urge you not to use it like this, because in this case you are both undermining the developments happening and you're taking the Russian position. At least nice you didn't call it the civil war. However, if we go further with the Tymoshenko, I will leave the martial law because it is easier to apply. Tymoshenko can surrender. Tymoshenko can't make a deal, if you feel the difference. Do you know that for the 5 years, almost 5 years, yeah, that we are in this conflict, Tymoshenko has never been on the contact line. Half of the parliament visited there, half of the European ministers of foreign affairs visited here. Mariupol never seen. Last month, for the first time, she traveled to the city of Konstantinovka, which is the last working railway station in big town. It has never been occupied. It has never been sheltered, even that they had a block post and they are some 50 kilometers from Donetsk. However, it is the safest city. I know it because my grandma is still living there. So that is the only city that she really visited and presented it as she traveled to the east. So you can imagine how much she knows or how much she cares about what is happening. Concerning the recognition of autonomous of Donbass, sorry, we should not recognize anything like this according to the Minsk agreements. In Minsk agreement is stated a special status. It is nothing about autonomy. Special status, the legislation exists for the last 3 years. The last time it was prolonged just a month ago. So Ukraine is doing it. And what else? Elections. We are ready to start them, but what is written again in Minsk agreements? Elections according to the Ukrainian legislation. Russians signed it, separatists signed it. What does it mean according to the Ukrainian legislation? Possibility of all political parties to participate in the process, possibility for media, both domestic and international, to be able to be there present, highlighted, Central Election Committee to organize the process, security of physical and security of constituency and everything, and right of all people to participate in that, so all citizens. Now you have shouting, you have international media and Ukrainian media not being able even to enter, you have absence of security, you have complete inability to fulfill anything from the OSCE obligations of the freedom of elections over there. You don't have lists of those to vote, and you don't have 1.5 million people of inhabitants of these regions. So their right to vote will be taken out. That's what separatists proposed. So can Ukraine organize elections according to the Ukrainian legislation and our OSCE commitments about the freedom of elections? All others of the points that you can find there, like with the prolongation of the special status, we can argue should something additional be included in special status or wherever, but first you need to have security. If you have one soldier being killed every day, you don't have the first point of Minsk agreement, ceasefire. How you can go to something of the political. And the last but not the least about the martial law. Martial law. I can agree that it was a political decision, but I can't agree that it was just because Poroshenko needed it for elections. It is wide. The country and our partners abroad needed to understand that the Kerch situation was not just a small incident, that it was a new level of the conflict. And it was a huge necessity to attract attention to it, not only by speaking to the international community, what is important, not only demonstrating facts, but also by accumulating efforts. So martial law, in one way, it is a demonstration of the seriousness of the incident. The second, it is a possibility to mobilize internal forces in terms of checkings, for example, inside, how they are prepared, how security forces are prepared in case it will develop, how many soldiers we have, do we have the plans for the critical infrastructure, Because if you look at those 10 regions which are under the martial law, some of them, like Mariupol, Dnipropetrovsk, they are much closer to the war zone. That's why they are more aware. They're more resilient. If you go to Chernigov, which is immediate border with Russia, they are completely relaxed. Not because they don't care about the war. They're very patriotic. No, but they don't feel it. It's so far for them. So a lot of people who should be aware to any potential risks, they behave as they behaved in 2012. So martial law in some way allowed to mobilize and to understand for these people that the conflict is real, it is happening, it can touch any of the regions, any of these spheres. So you need to be prepared, you need to wake up a little bit. So in this case, it is also political, let's say, yeah? So it is both like mobilization, attracting attention to the issues, and showing the readiness of the president to react. Yeah, so in some way. So that's also, yeah, political. That's as well. But before elections, he also, that is something what he can show up comparing to, let's say, Tymoshenko, who is the main opponent. Because he can show that I am the chief commander of the country. I am ready to act. Are you? And she voted, but then the next day started to say that it's not right, and so on and so on. So in this case, you can name political technology, but at the same time, you will be immediate not to use what was necessary to do in your political campaign when so many things are on stake.
Well, very short answer to the question about martial law as a political tool is, you put it probably, I would not say that, because the elections will be there, and that is the main argument and logic of what is going on. So that is only for 30 days, and then on the 1st of January the election campaign starts, as if nothing has happened, and then we have elections, and it was adopted by our parliament. So the date of elections is not changed, it's on the 31st of March. So that's kind of, in terms of like general attitude and influence and so on and so forth, I'm not told it, but in legal terms nothing is going to change here. About the, can Tymoshenko strike a deal or adopt Minsk agreements, I would answer with another question. Whether Russia is going to abide by any agreements or any deal that it signs. I mean, it's not a problem to strike a deal with Russia. It's very easy, really. You somehow come, talk, and you sign the deal. But as you can see from history, and history really teaches us very good lessons, you can never trust any single word of what Russian leadership says, and any single word of what is written in its agreements. I mean, it's the same with the Budapest Memorandum, it's the same with the Russian non-security assurances, guarantees, so on and so forth, with any other. You know these logics, nas ich tam net, so we're not there, there are some green men in Crimea, and then something else happens, and he says, yes, well, those were elections under Russian rule. No, there are no Russian soldiers in Donbass area, okay, but still there are some people with Russian passports and officers with insignia, and so on and so forth. So you just never strike a deal with Russia in that way, because you know that the next day, the next morning after it even might be struck with Russia, Putin will do whatever he says. And his logic is very clear. If you followed the recent G20 summit in Argentina, what he said is the war, so that is the word he used, not crisis, Ukrainian crisis, the war with Ukraine will go on until current Ukrainian leadership is in place. That's it. I mean, so it's not about what is going on in Ukraine, about Minsk agreements, about Normandy format. It's about Russia wanting to see Ukraine as part of its big Russian empire. So that's another story, and I do not believe at all there can be something like this under Tymoshenko. And the last two questions about what is the future of Turkish-Ukrainian relations. I think we have talked about 2.5 hours, so it would be difficult to repeat what we're talking about. And what happens if Turkey sides with Russia? I would say that is a suicide for Turkey, so I do not believe it will side with Russia like 100%. It's not all black and white, of course, so in some issues there will be cooperation between Turkey and Russia, in some other issue there will not be. But I believe that if you look, because I also have this PhD thesis on Turkish-American relations, so it's nice to have two specialists on Turkish-American relations and Turkish-Ukrainian panel. But still, the general logic, like in a cultural perspective, whenever Turkey feels itself quite strong, it goes for cooperation with Russia. Whenever it faces real threat from Russia, it bandwagons and sides again with the United States, NATO, so on and so forth. It happened like this in 2015. In the previous years, so once you have this emerging assertive aggressive Russia in the Black Sea, Turkey is still NATO member. It has not changed. So I don't think there will be kind of a radical shift or change in Turkey's foreign policy in that sense.
Mainly, I agree with Evgenia, and this is the issue. This Crimean and Ukrainian issues are the issues. If we use this compartmentalization narrative again, is one of the issues, top issues, that the parties put in one of those compartments. They cannot, they will not, they should not touch upon it for the moment. Then, if there is a force majeure for Turkish side, most probably Turkey quits this issue. It's a top issue for Turkey. Turkey and Russia cannot be in the same line on this issue, but under those current circumstances. If Turkey and Russia are in the same line in this Crimean and Ukrainian territorial issues, then you may say that this is another work. Then we are going to discuss another issue, another kind of a Turkish foreign and security policy. But under those current circumstances, I cannot and I don't expect any kind of Turkey siding with Russia in the resolution of all those issues. What Russia is expecting or waiting for as a resolution of this issue.
I would like to have a few sentences on this Turkish practice of compartmentalizing relations with Russia. This compartmentalization has a NATO dimension as well. In the North Sea, Turkey acts like a NATO member against Russia. Turkey has been a significant participant, contributor to NATO exercises last year. One Baltops, which bothers Putin very much. You know, Putin even asked Trump to stop NATO, that exercise in the North Sea. And also Turkey recently contributed to NATO's one of the largest exercises of the post-Cold War era, Trident Junction. Therefore, this compartmentalization is at work, vis-a-vis Russia in the north as a NATO member, but in the south it's a different story. And also that creates a kind of, bipolarity. Yes, even I have referred to NATO as an organization through which Turkey was not a member. No, Turkey is one of the oldest members, members of longest time, even before Germany. But we have this inclination to distance ourselves from NATO as if we were outsiders. No, we are in NATO, and we have a say, equal say with others. But from time to time, we forget that. And this is a reflection of Turkey's approach to NATO. In the post-Cold War era, especially in the last decade, Turkey has preferred to keep NATO away from its immediate neighborhood. Turkey doesn't want to see NATO presence. Although it's a member, NATO presence in the immediate vicinity of the country, including the Black Sea. As for new Cold War, it's partly a new Cold War, and it's underway, it's going on, because we have a return to Cold War practices, ramming ships, buzzing ships with aircraft, poisoning spies, and little green man tactics. So these are all Cold War instruments, they are at play. But it's multi-layered. We have new and unorthodox players like Saudi Arabia, trying to emerge as an actor. We have China rising on the side. Therefore, Cold War is part of the story, maybe more localized than the Cold War between Russia and the West, the New West. Therefore, we are facing something new. I mean, we didn't used to, during the Cold War, we didn't need to care about cyberspace. You know, spread of fake news, Russia influencing elections. Indeed, to be honest with you, election of Donald Trump, you know, reminded me of 3 movies: The Manchurian Candidate, Wag the Dog, and Being There. You know, I mean, all 3 together. And all, you know, most of the 2 of them at least were Cold War movies. It is something new. I mean, we won't see a repeat of the Cold War, that's definitely. But you know, the parties to the rivalry are tempted to resort to old and tried and tested practices of the Cold War.
Well, can I say a small word? We were laughing when you were asking the question about Marshmeyer, but it was not because of the question, but because of my old quarrel with these gentlemen back in April 2016 in Chicago, when he was trying late in the night to persuade me that in a friendly conversation that Ukraine should relax and allow Russia to do what they want, and don't poke, don't change, don't call for the international communities. I was a little bit frustrated, to say the least. So my reply was not from the sphere of international relations, but I explained that I don't know how in Chicago, but in Odessa, when you're raped, you're fighting with all your forces, don't care who is bigger, and you're calling for police and community. So that's what Ukraine is doing, and we don't care how big is Russia. Because in case you're raped and the aggression and war is equal to this, you're fighting for your existence first of all. After this, he was a little bit upset and frustrated with me, and I stopped reading him about the Russian-Ukrainian relations or Russia in all this politics, because I realized that he's still living with the ideas of the Soviet war, Soviet times, which are completely different from the current situation. Because Cold War had some rules, and both superpowers were more or less okay with following these gentleman agreements. It was difficult to negotiate, but they tried. Current conditions, it is not order, it is disorder. Because Russia are violating even those agreements that they are signing. So in such conditions, you don't care, you just fight.
Well, we'll put an end to it. Okay. very quickly, last 2 questions.
No, I'm always
we're running over. Very quickly, because we have needs here on the panel.
Yes, one piece of information which might be useful. Now, Russia had stopped buying natural gas from Turkmenistan. Now they are renegotiating and they are going to buy natural gas from Turkmenistan. That means that they intend to increase their exports, despite decreasing demand in their traditional markets. That's one point. And about Montreal Convention, you know the balances shift in the Black Sea since 1778. They always shift. So Turkey has to ask questions all the time. What will happen in the future? What will not happen in the future? So, and also Turkey has despite what you hear from the press, Turkey still has a historical memory. You have 1834, Hünkâr's Keresi. After that, 1844, you have London, and then 1856, you have Paris Convention, and then you have the Lausanne Convention, and then you have the Montreal Convention. Among all these agreements, the single long-standing document which preserved the balance, standing up to challenges of the Second World War and the Cold War, was Montreal Convention. So, while reassessing the value of Montreal Convention, this should also be kept in mind. Thank you.
I'm going to be very
I grabbed it.
Sorry, I'm going to be George Zalos. I'm a former member of the European Parliament, former European Commission ambassador, and friend of the Middle East since a long time. I would just follow an extremely interesting debate, I would say, touching the main geopolitics of Europe and of this region, but I'll come only probably to the last points regarding even Mersmeyer, that by chance, you know, I just had his last book with me, you know. I'm sorry, but it was the only thing I had with me today. But what probably his message is, not only for America and NATO, but for the Europeans, is that we need a new type, you know, of realism. We Europeans, we've been handling, you know, what I say, European affairs the last at least 30 years, as of the fall of the Berlin Wall, without having really any geopolitical action. Therefore, we don't have yet any type of international security arrangements within Europe. And what Mersmeyer probably tries to send as a message is that please look to what you've done, you US and you Europe. Our policy towards Ukraine is I think, a monumental failure of geopolitics today. Bringing NATO, you know, close to Ukraine, we knew it for years, you know, it's never going to work and it will backfire. Therefore, I think we need an entirely new strategic, I would say, arrangement, especially with Russia, but before that, obviously, we have to search to settle the Ukrainian problem. And this, we can imagine what these arrangements, you know, could be within a new partenariat with Russia. And so I think Europe is not yet ready. European policy is still in a limbo, you know, regarding there are no new thoughts, there are new geopolitical reactions. Still, Europe is looking, you know, almost afraid and perplexed what is going around. Still today, we don't have a policy towards Russia. What is policy towards Turkey is, again, there's no policy talking about association agreements. It goes nowhere. So probably, Dimitri, your new conference, it should be exactly about this very issue. What Europe should do, you know, at NATO with relations, especially to Russia and Ukraine, which is the main issue. If you want to discuss really relations and partnership between Ukraine and Turkey, so we don't know yet what are the fundamental, you know, issues that have not been settled. There is no arrangements there, and therefore, what we have a multipolar system that allows yet for a great regional players, much more important this time than during the bipolar wars. But still, there are many parameters that moving around and that makes the situation much more dangerous. So there's only a few comments, but obviously we could go on, I think, for the next session. Okay?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the panelists for the very, very interesting discussion. So thank you for your contribution. Thank you very much to Ukrainian Consulate in Istanbul and the Crimean Tatars in Ukraine, and also Ukrainian Prism for being partnering with us in this event. We can continue our discussion outside. Coffee, tea, beverages are being served, so we can have a discussion right in the moment. Thank you very much.